This is not an unfamiliar scripture, I bet. Some of us have heard this so many times we could probably just about quote it. In those days, a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be enrolled, etc., etc. And we kind of know that story, even if we stumble over the word Quirinius or Quirinius, or we might miss that one, but most of this story we have heard many, many times. And so we follow this man Joseph and his soon-to-deliver a baby fiancée named Mary from their home in the northern part of the country, up in Nazareth of Galilee, all the way down, probably 80 miles or so, to Bethlehem near Jerusalem, where apparently Joseph was from, and that is why he had to go back there. He was taking a long trip for a bad reason, taxes. Had to go back to your place of origin to be enrolled, said Caesar. And then verse 6 says, while they were there, the time came for her to deliver her child. And she gave birth, as far as we know, in a stable. Thanks to Brandon and Zach for making this stable for us. Maybe it wasn't really a stable. Maybe it was some like depression in the ground, or some would say a cave, or kind of like a cellar or a basement under a house, or maybe under the inn, where livestock were sometimes kept on the lower floor, and then people lived above that. In the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem, it appears to be a cave. You go into the church, then you go down all these steps into this little area, and that is supposedly the birthplace of our Lord. Why in the world? Because there was no room for them in the local motel, the Bethlehem Inn. So the story says. And our narrator, Dan, and the narration, thanks to Regina, suggests that maybe that innkeeper really has been getting a bad rap all these years. Was it really his fault that there was no vacancy in his inn? If it was full, it was full, right? We can speculate that maybe he was the one who actually directed them to some place they could go and get shelter, this nearby stable or cave or whatever it was. So maybe he actually went out of his way to show real compassion and real hospitality to somebody in need. However, that Holy Family got there. Being born in a barn is just not a great way to start out in life. We can sentimentalize the Christmas story, but you just can't sanitize the smell of that stable. Not a good setting. Jesus was born into a world that really seemed to have no place for him. He was born in these lowly conditions, in a lowly place, with lowly parents. And then, soon after his birth, there was a threat to his life, and so the Holy Family had to flee from where they were in Bethlehem because of Herod, and seek asylum in a totally foreign and unknown country of Egypt, and live as refugees there for 2 years before it was even safe to return. Maybe we need to ease up on the innkeeper. Maybe he did all he could. And maybe he's not so different from us, because we want to help, but we don't always know how. Now, we might pay for a night in a motel for some homeless family that comes by our house, but then we call and there's no vacancy. Then what do? We're not so sure. Do we invite them in? Not sure I want to go that far. Seems like these always come in bunches. I got a number of calls this week for help with the Deacon Fund. And some of these folks didn't exactly meet our criteria. So it's always a question of what do you do? Do you help or do you not help? So I did what I usually do. I called Ron O'Leary, our deacon chair, give him some of the responsibilities. Well, I'd sort of forgotten that he was actually having surgery that day on his nose, and he was in the doctor's waiting room waiting for surgery. We had this conversation, at least one of our conversations about these things. But I really appreciate Ron's availability, even there. And it is indeed hard to know how to respond to human need sometimes. But then there are those times that you just feel deep in your soul that you need to do something. And I'm thinking maybe the innkeeper felt that way. He didn't have any room, but he needed to do something. Ironically, this baby who was then born in that stable was the same one who later said, "When you help the least of these, you're helping me. And when you neglect them or turn your head and not see them or refuse them," well, you know what he said. I received a number of emails in the past couple of weeks from a friend of mine named Randy Simmons. I hadn't seen Randy for quite a while. Randy is a now retired school administrator and pastor. He was actually my associate at Lebanon Church of the Brethren for several years when I was part-time there and part-time here. And he was doing that while he was also principal at Bessie Weller Elementary School in Stanton. So he was a busy guy too. And years before that, Randy had been pastor at Grotto's Church of the Brethren, and his associate in that was Jack Glover. So we've got connections that go way back. Another connection is that Randy was chair of the district leadership team a few years before I was called to that position. And it seems that when his term ended and when he also retired from his job about the same time, he and his wife Debbie bought a motorhome and took off across America and were seldom seen. And so when I was asked to take that role of leadership team chair, I always referred to Randy and I said, "You know what happened to the last guy that had that job? He got a motorhome and left the state. Nobody's seen him since." But they still called me to take the job. But I did see Randy at Lebanon's homecoming this fall. He was back, but that's the first time I'd seen him in several years. And I got these emails here just within the last 2 weeks, several of them. I found out that he and Debbie are spending their winters in Brownsville, Texas, which is right on the Mexico border. And he wanted to share some information on something that they've become quite involved with down there, that actually quite a few people are involved with. And what I'm going to say, I do not mean it to be political, and Randy is not a political person, and he is not meaning it that way either. But I think it gives a contemporary example of people, again, for whom there is no room. Starting a couple of years ago with the government policy, with our government, of remain in place, that is, people who are seeking legal asylum in the U.S. Are now required to stay on the other side of the border rather than on our side while they're being processed. This group of people began to accumulate just across the bridge in Mexico from Brownsville, Texas. And at the beginning, there were not so many. There were maybe 100 people in a camp there, and a couple of local school teachers from Brownsville just went over the bridge. You can walk across the bridge one day and saw the horrible conditions in which these people were living and their lack of even decent food. And so they began to take breakfast over each day. And they did that at their own expense. They just did it. And then other people started joining in, and then they started taking an evening meal also, and more people became involved. And the numbers in that camp dramatically increased. And as of April of this year, the group that was helping began to refer to themselves as Team Brownsville. And they applied for a non-profit designation and received it, and they started a GoFundMe page on Facebook. And the Brownsville newspaper picked up the story and circulated it widely, and they won an award for the work that they were doing. So there are now maybe 1,200 people in that camp, and I suspect there are more than that actually by now. And these are people who, quote, have nothing. They've come from many places, primarily Central America. They're not trying to sneak across the border. They're trying to seek legal asylum, which is very seldom granted. And so they wait. But now it seems volunteers are coming to help. And volunteers are bringing food and supplies like diapers and toilet paper and backpacks and tents and blankets, which come from Church World Service, and toys for the kids and soccer balls and all kinds of things like that. And these volunteers are taking these supplies and food across the bridge. They're using little carts that you pull by hand and are pulling those supplies and going over to the camps and giving them to people in need. The United Methodist Church that Randy and Debbie attend there are very much involved with that and helping to organize all of that. And as you can imagine, it's a big responsibility to organize those things because many people want to help, but it takes organization. Actually, on Friday, just the day before yesterday, I was reading the Church of the Brethren Newsline, which is an online information from the denomination that comes about every week, and in there was a little thing about a church in Indiana, Manchester Church of the Brethren, that had been involved with this, had gone down and helped to supply food, and they were sharing that story. And Randy then has written some short stories about his experience working with these folks and about them. And he's writing about people who obviously are in desperate need, whose lives are threatened by violence and death, which again made me think about the baby Jesus, whose life was in danger, necessitating their journey to Egypt, to a foreign place. They are literally people for whom there is no room anywhere, it seems. They have had to leave their own countries because of the violence and the threats. And they are not wanted in our country, and they're not wanted in Mexico, where they are now stranded. And the Mexican government has not been very hospitable to them. In fact, I got another email from Randy just Wednesday as I was working on this, and he said that they've just learned that the Mexican government is going to move the camp from the border about a mile or so away, which will make it more difficult for volunteers to supply them and to help them. So Randy has written these stories and about these people and his experiences with them, and he has included with those stories discussion questions. And indeed, they would be appropriate for use in a Sunday school class or for any other setting to help raise people's awareness of their plight. I made some copies. I put them on the table back there, some copies of the stories. It includes Randy's email and also that article from the Brownsville Herald. So if you'd like to take those, please do. I invite you to take and read. If run out, I can certainly make more. I just have to say that Randy's stories and the emails I received have impacted me at just a very deep level, at a deep emotional and I think spiritual level. Because I know Randy. He's a person of faith and integrity, and He's a person who believes deeply in what he is doing there. And the stories of these people for whom there's just no room anywhere just seem so parallel to this story from the 2nd chapter of Luke about the one who was born in a stable, the one for whom there was also no room. And here we are today on the 3rd Sunday of Advent and proclaiming this to be Peace Sunday. And we're here to prepare for the birth of the one whom the prophet Isaiah predicted would be called the Prince of Peace. How about that? That from Isaiah 6, for a child has been, Isaiah 9:6, for a child has been born to us, a son given to us. Authority rests on his shoulders. He is named Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Ever-loving, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. And in the 61st chapter of Isaiah, we have words of Isaiah again that Jesus later used to announce his mission on earth when he came in Luke 4. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me. He has sent me to bring good news to the oppressed, to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. Peacemaking certainly includes helping those who are poor, who are oppressed, who are captives, the lame and the blind and the disenfranchised, all of the least of these. That mandate comes from Jesus himself. Jesus, the one for whom there was no room in the inn, even to be born, the one who was forced to flee to a foreign country to seek asylum from Herod, the one who as an adult said he had no place to lay his head, the one who died condemned by a foreign power, died on a Roman cross, and then was buried in a borrowed tomb. He is the one who calls us to help those for whom there is no room in this world. Those who are left out, shunned, neglected, whoever, wherever they are. And I think we want to help. I really do. We want to help. We hear a call to help. But we just don't always know where to dig in. Now, maybe we'd like to go to Brownsville, Texas, and pull a wagon of supplies across that bridge. Or maybe we'd like to go with Jack and Tina on a disaster response trip, as they so often do. Plenty of opportunities to serve. But we can't always do those things that seem to be the big thing. What can we do? There must be things we can do, like that innkeeper. Maybe we can't house a homeless person, but maybe we can pay for a night in a motel for them or direct them to the shelter. I don't know. There are things we can do. May we at least do what we can do, as that innkeeper did what he could do. And so that reminded me, I'd seen this somewhere and I looked it up. It's an epitaph on Fanny Crosby's tombstone. Fanny Crosby, the great songwriter and musician. And her epitaph says, "She hath done what she could." Those are words from Mark's Gospel where Mary, the woman who anointed Jesus' feet with the costly perfume, remember? And Jesus said of her, because people were criticizing, and he just says, "She hath done what she could." Wouldn't those be fitting words to have on our tombstone? He has done what he could. She has done what she could. May we do what we can.